Hello lovelies! In today's video you'll learn how to paint a jar. This can be a really cute project to, for example, decorate your home or use as plant pots and even to store some of your crafts materials. Now let's take a look at what you'll need. Of course, the jar. Choose any jar of your preference, ideally upcycle one that you have lying around. Next would be some varnish. This is to make your project waterproof and making sure that it lasts long. Some acrylic paint or some other paint mediums that you like and have available. At least 3 brushes, one for the varnish, one for the paint, and one for the gesso. And then finally some gesso to prepare the jar to take on the paint. And now, before we get started, let me show you who I'm making this project for. Meet Ava. She's my little avocado and she needs a new home at the beach. Now let's get started. The first step is to get your gesso and apply it to the jar. Make sure that your jar is nice, clean and dry before you apply any gesso. And also, you will need to prepare the gesso. Sometimes they can be a bit thicker and gloopy, so thin them out a little bit with water if needed, and that will help for the surface to be a lot smoother. You will need to apply as well more than one layer, so don't worry too much about having full coverage on the first layer. When you select your brush, make sure it's not your favorite brush because gesso might ruin it, and select one that might have a bit of a wider and flat surface so that you can reach bigger areas. It doesn't need to be super precise typically when you're applying gesso. In my case, the jar came with a top. This is completely optional as you like and depending on the design that you're going for. I'm not going to use it, but I thought, well, I already have my gesso out, I might as well just do it too. After you've applied the first layer, I would recommend that you let it dry for at least 30 minutes. That's how long I need it. But also the time can vary depending on, your surroundings, how thick the layer is of the gesso that you've applied, and the gesso itself. Make sure it is dry though before you apply the second layer. You can see me here starting to apply the second layer, and that's the amount of layers that I needed. I didn't need to go to a third one, but again, this might vary depending on how thick or thin the gesso is that you're using. The purpose of applying gesso is really to create some texture so that the paint can adhere to the jar, and also it creates a white background so that the colors get very saturated and vibrant after you've applied them. Once you've applied your second or third layer, depending on what you're happy with in terms of coverage, it's time to let it dry one more time. If you have been letting it dry between each layer, this should not take any longer. In my case, I let it dry overnight simply because I didn't have more time to continue working on it. But you can leave it for half an hour or whatever you have been letting it dry for. Now we're at step 2, painting your design. The gesso should be completely dry, and now here's where your creativity comes in place. If you don't know exactly what to do, my recommendation would be that you think about the purpose of what you're doing. In my case, for example, I'm doing it for my little avocado. It's gonna be a new house, and the way I thought about it was, she needs a lot of water, she's an avocado. So it brought me straight to the beach, the ocean, so why not make her a new beach house? So in your case, it could be completely different. The design that you make might be very simple, like mine, or very complex. What's important really is that you have fun with it, that you enjoy the process, everything from getting the inspiration, actually doing it, and then later enjoying looking at it. Now that you have your concept, it's time to select the colors to bring it to life. In my case, it's a beach house, so we're thinking blues. I thought about kind of a sandy beaches, so orange, kind of cream, and I also needed white to add accents to the waves. To make the design a little bit more fun and give it a focal point, I'm also gonna create a little avocado surfer. So for that, I'm gonna need a bit of green and a black marker to add some details. One thing that I recommend you do when you're choosing your colors is that you choose a combination between cool and warm tones. That's just gonna help for the composition of your finished work to just pop more and to look nicer. Cool colors are considered blues and purples, or colors mixed with those undertones. And same for warm colors, it's red, yellows, or those colors mixed with those specific undertones. In my case, I've selected a design that is relatively abstract. It's sort of trying to recreate the beach, but not really exactly as it is. In case you're going for a more complex design that really has a lot of detail, I'd recommend that you trace it beforehand, especially with the shape of jars. Whether it's square or round, it might be sometimes tricky to get lines exactly the way you want. So you can use tracing paper, or after you have added the gesso, just with some pencil, trace little designs. In my case, so I added the orange to the top half as a bit of the background, and then at the bottom half I added the blue waves. I made sure that the color orange was very dry before I added the blue because I didn't want them to mix. And you might also notice that I am applying the blue in a sort of wave-like motion. That's to recreate that kind of ocean wave feel. When it dries, it will actually capture that more nicely, instead of, for example, me having painted that straight up and down. Wouldn't have had the same effect. Next, you also see me applying now some white on top of the waves. This is because if you think about the ocean, when the waves crash, they become a little bit lighter at their tips. So I'm trying to recreate that sensation that they're becoming lighter. So mixing it with the wet blue with a white, it's kind of creating a bit of a light blue effect. You will see me shortly as well doing the opposite. So adding a bit of, I think it was purple that I added to the bottom parts of the waves, and that creates more like the depth of the ocean. The different contrast is also, if you think about light and shadow, that creates in general more depth to your image. Because I was using my right hand as sort of the stand to hold the crafts project, it was kind of a little funny having to mix and grab the different items with one hand only. So keep that in mind as well when you're working on it, to have everything in reach. Because if you've painted the bottom like I did, you might not want to place the jar, down on the surface of the table. Now that I have applied some of the whites and some of the darker blues onto the project, While the paint is still wet, I am trying now to blend the colors a little bit more with each other to create a much more even gradient. To achieve the look that I was going for in that gradient, as I was just mentioning, I needed to make sure that I changed my direction. So sometimes I pulled the color from the whites into the blues, into the darker blues, and then vice versa. Then I kind of dragged the darker blues more into the white parts. And by doing that interchangeably, you can then get a gradient, because the colors in the center will be the ones to get mixed. And depending on if you came from the bottom or the top, it will be darker or lighter. To complete my background, I wanted to add a bit of a sun, a bit of some yellow. So you will see me here applying 2 coats, because this was a very thin layer. And yeah, yellow is just not typically a very covering color. So I needed to apply 2 to 3 layers before I was happy. There's really 2 ways to do blend techniques. One is with the paint still being wet, which we saw a moment ago, and now I'm applying it when the paint is dry. Both the blue in the background is dry, and the whites that I'm applying here are also very dry. And what I'm trying to recreate here is sort of a bit of a spread of the color, so that the color doesn't actually look at all evenly, and it sort of tries to mimic again the wave and how it looks, especially when it's crashing and sort of separating. The purpose of this is to continue to give that illusion of a wave, so I'm also trying to replicate those wave-like motions to mimic the wave. You can clearly see how just with this little detail of white, the design is starting to come together and it's starting to look more like a wave. What you see me doing here as I place it down and turn it around, it's kind of to step away from the absolute details that you're focusing on and looking at the entire picture and seeing how is it looking. Next, I started adding the details. In my case, I took a marker, sort of like as if it was my pencil, just to draw my avocado surfer. I needed it to kind of know how it would start to look so that when I applied the color, I didn't have to modify it too many times afterwards. You can of course do it free-handed like I did, or you can trace it as long as everything else around it is fully dry. And also to add, help yourself. In my case, because it's an avocado, I kind of know what an avocado looks like, but still I went on Google and sort of looked and searched for avocado images so that I kind of understood what kind of shapes to add. And then I made it my own. I kind of gave it a twist with like the little sunglasses, and the little seed is the big nose that my avocado has. If you do use markers like me, I strongly suggest that you use waterproof ones. That the black one that I used was not waterproof, and I could see when I was applying the varnish that it was smearing a little bit. You also see me here testing out different markers that I have at home, but they just ended up not really working that well. So I went back to acrylic paint. Now you see me adding birds to the scenery just to complete the whole surrounding. I'm adding them 3 at a time because supposedly it's more appealing and more interesting to the eye when you have odd numbers rather than even numbers. After finishing all the details, I let it dry overnight, and then it was time to varnish it. I do not have the recording here, but I will explain to you what I did. Essentially, you grab the varnish that you've chosen, whether it is a spray one or a liquid one, and you apply it. Oftentimes you will have to apply 2 to 3 layers to get a really nice and even result. I personally went with a glossy varnish because I like it to kind of pop, especially with these bright colors. And you might consider applying each layer into different directions. It is recommended. In my case, I didn't do it because it wasn't looking great. So apply it as needed for you, and let it dry completely before you start handling it. So now let's take a look at Ava's new beach house. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope this was useful and that you're delighted with your masterpiece. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments below. And if you like the video, please give me a thumbs up. I'll be making more of these, so make sure to subscribe to see the next videos. Bye!